Race is a social construct. We've heard it repeated, dissected, debated, yet it holds on to its power, its ability to divide and define. Growing up, I saw the truth of this every day in the faces of my family, the stories whispered, the opportunities denied. Race, though constructed, casts a very real shadow over America. The legacy of racism, of segregation and oppression lives on. It's in the fabric of our institutions, woven into the tapestry of daily life. We see it in the stark disparities of wealth, health, and opportunity. We feel it in the air we breathe, a constant tension, an unspoken divide. To dismantle this deeply ingrained system, we must first confront its insidious nature. We must acknowledge the ways in which race, though a construct, has real, tangible consequences. This isn't about guilt or blame. It's about understanding the truth of our shared history. It's about recognizing that the fight for racial equality is not over. It's a fight that demands our attention, our empathy, our unwavering commitment to justice. We cannot, we must not, turn away from this uncomfortable truth. The future of our nation, the very soul of America, depends on it. Identity is a complex tapestry, woven from personal experiences, cultural heritage, and societal perceptions. But what happens when our understanding of ourselves, of our place in the world, is built on a foundation of illusions? For many, particularly those who identify as white, there's a dangerous fantasy at play. It's the fantasy of being raceless, of existing outside the system of racial hierarchy. This denial of racial identity, this belief in a so-called colorblind society, only serves to perpetuate the very inequalities it claims to transcend. By refusing to acknowledge their own racial identity, white Americans shield themselves from the uncomfortable truths of our nation's past and present. They fail to see how their own privilege operates, how it shapes their experiences and opportunities. This lack of awareness, this unwillingness to engage with the complexities of race is what allows racism to persist. It's time to shatter these illusions, to move beyond the comfort of denial. True equality requires an honest reckoning with our past, a deep understanding of the ways in which race continues to shape our present. Only then can we begin to build a future where everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, has the opportunity to thrive. For generations, whiteness has been positioned as the norm, the standard against which all others are measured. This manufactured hierarchy has created a false dichotomy, pitting white against other, perpetuating a system of power and privilege that benefits some at the expense of many. The concept of white identity itself is rooted in exclusion. It's defined not by what it is, but by what it is not. It's the absence of color, the denial of difference, the perpetuation of a false sense of superiority. This manufactured identity, built on a foundation of exclusion and supremacy, has no place in a just and equitable society. We must move beyond the confines of this narrow definition, challenge the very notion that whiteness is synonymous with normalcy or superiority. It's time to recognize that true strength lies not in homogeneity, but in diversity. Our differences, far from being a source of division, are what make us strong, vibrant, and resilient. It's time to embrace a more inclusive vision of ourselves, one that celebrates the richness and complexity of human experience in all its forms. For communities of color, the legacy of the past is not easily forgotten. It's etched in our stories, passed down through generations, a constant reminder of the struggles endured and the resilience displayed. Our identities have been shaped by centuries of oppression, by the constant fight for recognition, for equality, for basic human dignity. From the forced removal of indigenous populations to the horrors of slavery and Jim Crow, the history of America is intertwined with the exploitation and marginalization of people of color. These experiences, though painful, have also been a source of strength, forging a deep sense of community, resilience, and cultural pride. However, the weight of this heritage can also be heavy to bear. The trauma of the past can manifest in the present, leading to internalized racism, intergenerational trauma, and a constant feeling of being othered. It's essential to acknowledge this pain, to create spaces where healing can occur. We cannot simply erase the past, but we can choose to learn from it, to draw strength from the resilience of our ancestors, and to use our voices to fight for a more just and equitable future. Privilege, by its very nature, is often invisible to those who possess it. It's the unseen advantages, the unspoken assumptions, the unearned benefits that come with being part of the dominant group. For many white Americans, this privilege is so deeply ingrained, so woven into the fabric of their lives that they fail to recognize it even exists. They may not see the ways in which their race opens doors, how it shields them from the daily indignities and microaggressions experienced by people of color. They may not realize that their experiences, their perspectives are not universal, but rather a product of their position within a system designed to benefit them. Unmasking this privilege is essential for dismantling systemic racism. It requires a willingness to listen, to learn, to step outside of one's own limited perspective, and to see the world through the eyes of those who have been marginalized and oppressed. It's about recognizing that equality is not a zero-sum game. Acknowledging the existence of white privilege does not diminish the achievements of individuals. Rather, it allows us to see how the playing field is tilted, how the system is rigged in favor of some at the expense of others. Denial is a powerful force. It allows us to shield ourselves from uncomfortable truths, to maintain a sense of comfort and control in the face of injustice. But denial, no matter how deeply entrenched, cannot change the reality that exists outside of our carefully constructed bubbles. For many white Americans, the legacy of racism is something to be denied, minimized, or relegated to the past. They may cling to the myth of a colorblind society, arguing that race is no longer a significant factor in determining one's life outcomes. This denial, however well-intentioned, is a dangerous form of self-deception. It prevents us from having honest conversations about race, from acknowledging the ways in which systemic racism continues to permeate every aspect of American life. It allows us to absolve ourselves of responsibility, to turn a blind eye to the suffering of others. To dismantle the structures of racism, we must first confront the culture of denial that allows it to thrive. We must be willing to have those difficult conversations, to acknowledge the ways in which our own biases and privileges contribute to the problem. Only then can we begin to create a more just and equitable society for all. The past is never truly past. It lingers, it haunts, it shapes the present in ways both seen and unseen. For America, the ghosts of our racist past are ever present, whispering their truths in the wind. We see them in the monuments that glorify a history built on slavery and oppression. We hear them in the rhetoric of hate and division that continues to plague our political discourse. We feel them in the systemic inequalities that persist across every facet of American life. Confronting these ghosts is not about dwelling in guilt or shame. It's about acknowledging the truth of our history, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the tragedies. It's about understanding how the sins of the past continue to cast a long shadow over the present. It's about recognizing that true reconciliation requires more than just apologies or symbolic gestures. It demands a fundamental shift in our thinking, a dismantling of the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality. Truth can be uncomfortable. It can challenge our preconceived notions, disrupt our carefully constructed narratives, and force us to confront the limitations of our own understanding. But truth, no matter how difficult, is the only path to healing, to reconciliation, to building a more just and equitable world. The truth about race in America is not always easy to hear. It's the truth of systemic racism, of implicit bias, of white privilege, and the enduring legacy of slavery and segregation. It's the truth of opportunity denied, of voices silenced, of lives cut short by violence and neglect. But it's also the truth of resilience, of resistance, of communities coming together to fight for their rights, for their dignity, for their very survival. It's the truth of progress made, of barriers broken, of dreams realized against all odds. To move forward, we must embrace the full spectrum of truth, the good and the bad, the painful and the inspiring. We must be willing to listen to the stories of those who have been marginalized and oppressed, to see the world through their eyes, to feel the weight of their experiences. The journey toward racial justice begins with self-reflection. It's about looking inward, examining our own biases, and confronting the ways in which we may have, consciously or unconsciously, benefited from and perpetuated a system of racial hierarchy. This process of self-examination can be uncomfortable, even painful. It requires us to confront our own complicity, to acknowledge the ways in which our actions or inaction may have contributed to the problem. But it is through this process of self-discovery that we can begin to dismantle the structures of racism from within. We must be willing to ask ourselves difficult questions. How has race shaped our own experiences, our opportunities, our worldview? What are our own implicit biases, and how do they manifest in our interactions with others? How can we use our privilege, our platforms, our voices to advocate for change? The answers to these questions may not always be easy to hear, but they are essential for our own growth and for the creation of a more just and equitable society. It is only by confronting our own biases, by acknowledging our own complicity, that we can begin to dismantle the structures of racism and create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. We are all bound by the chains of history, by the legacy of our ancestors, by the systems and structures that shape our world. But we are not powerless to break free. We have the power to choose a different path, to create a different future, to build a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect. Breaking the chains of racism requires a collective effort. It demands that we stand together, across lines of race, religion, and ethnicity, to dismantle the systems of oppression that have held us captive for far too long. It's about recognizing that our liberation is intertwined, that we cannot be truly free until all are free. It's about using our voices, our platforms, our resources to amplify the voices of the marginalized and to fight for justice and equality for all. This is not a fight for the faint of heart. It will require courage, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to creating a better world for generations to come. But it is a fight worth having, a fight that we cannot afford to lose. Imagine a world where our differences are not seen as threats, but as strengths. A world where our unique identities, our cultural heritage, our lived experiences are woven together to create a vibrant tapestry of human existence. This is the world we must strive to create, a world where diversity is celebrated, and where everyone feels a sense of belonging. This vision of a more inclusive society requires a fundamental shift in our thinking. It requires us to move beyond the limitations of binary categories, to embrace the fluidity and complexity of human identity. It requires us to recognize that our differences, far from being a source of division, are what make us strong, resilient, and capable of infinite possibilities. It's time to rewrite the narrative, to redefine what it means to be American, to create a society that reflects the rich diversity of its people. This is not a utopian dream, but a necessary goal, a moral imperative for a nation founded on the principles of equality and justice for all. The fight for racial justice is not a destination, but a journey. It's a journey that begins within each of us, with a commitment to self-reflection, to education, to dismantling the structures of racism in our own hearts and minds. It's a journey that requires us to confront our own biases, to challenge our own assumptions, to step outside of our comfort zones and engage with the world in new and meaningful ways. It's a journey that demands courage, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a better future. This journey is not always easy. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, times when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear. But we must never give up hope. Never stop believing in the power of collective action to create lasting change. The fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. It's a journey that will take generations to complete. But with each step we take, with each act of courage, with each voice raised in the pursuit of equality, we move closer to the promise of a more just and equitable world.